Today is a very important milestone in Azure's evolution because this is the first formal interaction we're actually having with the media. And we're very fortunate that we have two of the senior executives in town as well. And I think the reason why we wanted to kind of get together and just spend some time talking to you is for a couple of reasons. One is, I think, the short time of existence that Azure has been around. We have been able to very successfully overturn a lot of conventions in the industry. A lot of the compromises that the industry has forced upon its clients and the clients have reluctantly accepted. I think you will see that Azure has actually been able to overturn a lot of those compromises. So we want to spend some time talking about the brand Azure, how we actually differentiate ourselves vis-a-vis the competition, and give you some perspectives of what our growth plans are, what the future looks like. The second and equally important announcement we want to make is actually talk with the first acquisition that Azure has made. And we have acquired a company called Cybrint Technologies. It's a company that is a boutique firm in digital technologies and user experience. It fits in very well with Azure's game plan in terms of what services we expect the market to demand going forward. It also gives us a very good customer base to whom a larger portfolio of services can be taken to. And the third, of course, is we want to just spend some time talking about how this effectively helps the Azure strategy in India, going forward, what the plans are, what the vision is. So without taking too much of a time, I want to introduce Rangan, who is the founder, the CEO, and the chairman of the board at Azure Global, and VT, who is the founder of Cybrint Technologies and now come on board as the managing director of Azure India. So gentlemen.
Rangan, based out of Chicago. So I do travel to India probably about 2 or 3 times a year. Just to give you a perspective for Azure, Azure has been in existence since about 2012. I went to the US in 1992, worked for some Fortune 500 companies, started my journey with Intel Corporation, then worked with a few of the Fortune 500s, also worked with the consulting organization Deloitte, and before I decided to branch into creating Azure. This has been a calling for me personally. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur. There's one thing that's really helped me through the journey of life is not necessarily my IQ or EQ, but the clarity of what I want, and more importantly, what I do not want. So I think that clarity, basically led to the creation of the company. I think for me personally, the journey has been one of profound passion from the start. So to give you an example, one of our first customers was Coca-Cola Enterprises. So we started with the intention to actually directly work with Fortune 500 companies from the get-go. And that model has worked out extremely well for us. We consciously never decided to, want to subcontract, any work through other entrenched players. We pretty much were able to take many of the entrenched players pretty much head on. Most of our clients prefer the model that we operate under, or the space that we work with. So to talk about our model relative to the competition, because one of the key questions that most people typically have is how are we different? I think every company in this world wants to be different. They walk in with that intention that they are different. But however, most companies end up becoming competitive clones of the competition, because instead of focusing on customers, they actually focus on the competition. So if you were to apply a little economic theory, most of the companies today in the outsourcing industry focuses a lot more on what I consider high volume and probably low margin businesses, mostly commodity work. So if you classify the spectrum of activity, you have what is called perfect competition, and the other is called imperfect competition. Perfect competition is a space where it's mostly a buyer's market. Buyers can constantly push sellers to push prices lower, and it's very hard to tell the trees from the forest, which means that it's very difficult to separate one company from another. Then, of course, on the other end, you have companies which are mostly monopoly or oligopolies that tend to differentiate themselves. So the key question here is, do you want to create value for your customers, but at the same time you also have to be valuable? So to give you a perspective on that, if you take the airlines today, the US airlines combined are about $100 billion. And if you take the likes of Google and Apple, they're worth about anywhere from 350 to 700, 800 billion dollars. So if you really look at it, there's no dispute that the airlines create a lot of value, but in turn, they have not been valuable. So I think from an Azure perspective, we have decided consciously that we not only want to create value, but we also want to be valuable in the process. So the space that we choose to work with is mostly in the high impact, high value, outcome based kind of work, which basically pushes us into more of the I would consider oligopoly kind of a framework where the space that you're actually working in separates you from the crowd. So that's the overall model. Our elevator pitch basically sums it up as high impact, quantifiable value, and consequential results. And I think the key question that you have to probably ask is, why work on high impact work? For us, working on high impact work essentially makes the kind of work that we do more consequential, which means that everyone wants success. But I think the key question is whether you want success which is more consequential, or do you want to chase inconsequential work? So I think for us, chasing high impact work has been able to create that. I'm just going to field it up to some questions as I go along, just to avoid making this a monologue.
What is your product?
We are in the services business. We are in professional services. Essentially, that's our core area. The likes of many of the consulting organizations or outsourcing arms, pretty much are in the same space, in the services space.
Which area within the services are you into? ERP or you're into?
So there are three areas, right? For example, there is the space of change the game, then there is play the game, and stay the game. So change the game are those that are very interested in disrupting, customers. So for example, the goal would be to disrupt the business model of your customer or its customers. The next space is play the game, which is helping your customers be very, very competitive. And of course, stay the game is the space where you're focused on efficiencies, which means that you're helping your customers with efficiency problems, which means that you have to figure out how to do something at the lowest possible price. So those are the three spaces. Now, just like any company, we work on a basket of technologies and we work on a basket of problems. But we prefer to work more in the change the game space, which basically means that the obsession around finding and working with technologies, processes, and problems that actually disrupt one's customer and perhaps it's your customer's customers. That is the space which we tend to focus a lot more on. And then we also focus on the space where you're helping your customers be very, very competitive. There is an efficiency portion as well, but that portion ends up becoming a much smaller percentage of the overall work. So our focus, what we want to be known for, is this. Now, if you look at the range of problems a company can take on, you have the easy problems, you have the hard problems, and then you have the impossible problems. I think from an Azure perspective, right from the beginning, our obsession is to actually work on some of the hardest problems. Rather than just choose the easy problems, we prefer to work with our customers' hardest problems. And then, of course, you have the impossible problems. The impossible problems are problems that the likes of Tesla, for example, today try to solve. So we'll get there in a few years. But currently, the problems that we take on with our customers, when we go to our customers, our essential ask is, give us some of your most difficult problems. We are not in the business to compete on price. We don't go to our customer and say, today somebody is doing it for, let's say, $100 per hour. We are not going to come and say, we'll give it to you for 95, shift that business over to us. That, I don't think, is a model that we prefer. If our customer is happy with an entrenched player, we let them continue there. And we would rather pick the kinds of problems that our customer is not able to get solved with many of the entrenched players. The other important thing that I want to point out is, Many of our competition today follows a spray and pray, which means that they want to be everywhere doing everything. While that model might work extremely well for them, it's not a model that we follow. Our model is much more focused model, both from a geography perspective and an account perspective, and where possible, the kinds of problems that we take on. We don't want to necessarily restrict ourselves from specific technologies, because we really believe that technology is a constantly changing game, so you don't have to limit yourself. But the kind of problems that you take on, you can certainly be much more defined. And those problems typically do not require you to work on your customers' price sensitivity, but rather your company, your customers able to give you a value based on the value that you create. So either you compete on price or you compete on value. We compete on value, not on price.
What do you mean by professional services?
Consulting services, outsourcing services, strategy services, digital services, ERP services, end-to-end implementations, production support. Those are the kinds of things.
What are the areas of focus your clients are in? Are they banks? Are they retail?
So today, we started with consumer goods, CPG. And then, of course, we worked on, retail. Since then, our customer base ranges from CPG, retail, manufacturing, high tech, and a lot of the aggressive companies. Many of them, are in the high tech space in Silicon Valley, doing fairly advanced things in various areas like Internet of Things, digital services, social media, platform revolution.
You talked about Coca-Cola. What do you do for Coca-Cola?
See, I don't want to get into the specifics of each account, because there are specific permissions that we have to get from our customers before we share that. I just wanted to give you a representative idea of the kind of customers that we work with. Getting into the specifics of a particular customer is something that I'll have to get permission from the customer before I talk about it in public media.
Let
We
me
generally tell what kind of work we do for
at least specifically what do you do for
CPG?
a company like Coca-Cola?
Sure.
Need not be Coca-Cola.
Absolutely. So in the change the game space, I think one of the areas that we worked on is Internet of Everything. That's one. We certainly help our customers in that space with the Internet of Me. Help them with their digital footprint, which includes e-commerce, mobility. As you see, there's a huge focus on SMAC, which is Social Mobile Analytics Cloud. We actually help our customers in a range of these technologies, because a lot of the work that you do leverages high-end analytics, including the predictive analytics that many of these companies now leverage. We actually help them with big data, using Hadoop and many of these technologies. So that is in the change the game space. And for some of them, we actually help them also in play the game, which is in the traditional ERP services that include SAP and PeopleSoft. But I want to say one thing that needs to come out here. At the end of the day, even from a professional services stage, we're basically an omni-channel company, which basically means that we help our customers bridge the digital physical blur. See, as you have seen, today you have many companies in the brick and mortar business.